This is Dr. J. Welcome to Thesising 101, where the more obvious the point, the harder the reference is to find. Today we are continuing our series on qualitative data analysis, specifically focusing on thematic analysis. Thematic analysis allows the researcher to extract themes or patterns from qualitative data, which is non-numeric data such as text. Think of thematic analysis as sorting and arranging your data in such a way that you eventually tell a story. And that story must answer your research questions. Each theme is a significant piece of data that must relate to your research objectives, else it cannot answer your research question. The data you use for this type of analysis can be collected via interviews, observations, documents, and a whole host of other methods. There are several ways a theme can be extracted from raw data: inductively, deductively, and even a combination of both. If you're not quite sure what that means, please check out my tutorial on induction, deduction, retroduction, and abduction. To make it easier for you to follow this tutorial, however, I am including a quick overview. Let's say you want to understand what online dating is like. So you join Tinder. This is what will happen if you follow an inductive process of answering your research question, which in our case is, what is online dating like? You use the app for 3 days and make a few observations. You notice that most of these guys are pretty gross, so you get the niggly feeling that online dating is maybe not that great. After 2 more days, you come to the conclusion that online dating is the absolute worst. If you are doing your study deductively, the research question doesn't change, but the process of how you go about answering it does. Here, we start with a theory. For example, a friend of yours shares a couple of horror stories on online dating and says it is the worst. Based on the theory, you already have expectations of what you may find if you join the online dating pool. You join Tinder and make a couple of observations to check if your hypothesis on online dating is supported or if your friend was exaggerating. After a week, you can confirm that indeed, online dating is the worst. So essentially, if we are extracting themes from raw data inductively, it means our study is data-driven, meaning any theme we come up with is extracted purely by looking at the raw data. This is a great way to gain rich insights into phenomena because the data is doing the talking without the researcher having preconceived notions such as hypotheses. In a few minutes, I'll show you a proper example. Now moving on to extracting themes from a deductive perspective. To reiterate, deductive means that you already have an expectation of the themes you may find when examining your raw data. Note, this, however, does not mean that you are actively looking for data that will support your hypothesis come hell or high water. That is not research, that is propaganda. So sticking to the Tinder example, if you start the online dating process with the hypothesis that online dating sucks, you have to be open to the idea that it may possibly be quite delightful. In other words, your findings are still rooted in data, irrespective of whether it is deductive or inductive. The great thing about having an idea of the possible themes you may encounter when examining your raw data is that it will be easier for you to recognize the theme because you already know what to look out for. And the thing that may help you in knowing what to look for is called a framework. If you're not familiar with the concept of a framework, please check out my tutorial. I will also create a video in the series of how to convert a framework into a codebook, which is a practical tool you can use to help you recognize themes. A deductive approach to thematic analysis is considered researcher-driven, as you, the researcher, will look at the raw data with a specific lens, which is your framework. If someone else is looking at the same raw data with a different framework, different themes may pop up. Using a framework is a great way to ensure that you don't miss major themes simply because you did not recognize them. As mentioned before, you can extract themes from both an inductive and deductive perspective in the same study. Let's continue using the online dating scenario as an example of this approach. In this case, your raw data will be things like texts, call logs, and the observations you made upon meeting these guys in real life. Your first pass at extracting themes could be to do so from an inductive perspective where you let the data do the talking. A theme that may emerge could be content, as in, what are these boys saying? You also notice a theme in frequency. Some only send one text and that's it, while other conversations dwindles as time passes, and then you have the few that want to chat regularly. You also notice a theme in platform. Those who want to speak more regularly suggest moving to a more convenient platform such as WhatsApp, where the conversation eventually also dies, and those who are already halfway out the door tend to stay on platform. Now let's take the same raw data and extract themes by using a framework. You notice that the framework also speaks about content and frequency. Great. However, a theme that you missed according to your framework is convenience. So you systematically dig into your raw data looking for any evidence that is related to convenience. And lo and behold, you notice that online dating provides the opportunity to screen guys before you meet them, which is great, but it also reduces the organic relationship development, which is not that great. Something else you missed according to the framework is the effect of technology on engagements between humans. So you make a point of looking at the differences in the conversation you had via calls and text, where there was a sense of anonymity, versus the conversations you had in real life, where it was a little bit harder for you to hide who you are. The great thing about extracting data both inductively and deductively means you get the best of both worlds. For instance, if you only used the framework, you would not have identified platform as a theme. However, if you went about it without the framework, you would have missed a few important themes such as engagement and convenience. Your research problem will dictate which approach is best. There are 6 phases in thematic analysis. And although these phases are represented as a linear process, you can revisit a phase even if you have already moved to the next one. I will be creating a tutorial on each of these phases over the coming weeks to show you how you can go about doing this. But here are real examples of the outputs at each phase, so it is not that unfamiliar when you sit down and do it yourself. Familiarizing yourself with the data just means that you have to transcribe your data and read it multiple times. This also includes reading and rereading materials such as documents that you may have collected. Of course, you wouldn't have to transcribe those as they will already be in text form. To do this phase, you don't need fancy programs at all. For instance, I just use MS Words for transcribing. I feel like I have to warn you that this is the most excruciatingly boring part of research. I nearly die every time I have to do this. And I'm not exaggerating, so sterkte. That is good luck in Afrikaans. Anyway, next up we have generating initial codes. This literally means reading your transcripts and documents and assigning codes or categories to pieces of data. As you can see, one piece of data can belong to a single or multiple codes. If you have a small data set, you can do this in Excel, but if you have a large data set, you may want to use specialized software such as InVivo. For this particular study, I uploaded my transcripts into InVivo and I did my coding. What you are seeing on screen is an extract from InVivo into MS Word just so I could illustrate the concepts of coding. Phase 3 is where you start interpreting your data and creating arguments. This is where you take all your codes and sort and morph them into themes. For this particular study, I identified close to 70 codes and eventually sorted them into themes, sub-themes, and sub-sub-themes. Using a mind map is a great way to show the relationship between pieces of data. I created this mind map in InVivo, but if you have a smaller data set, you can do this in PowerPoint or drawing tools such as MS Visio, for instance. Paper will work just fine too. The codes that were colored in pink were the ones I identified inductively, as they were not part of the frameworks that I used in the study, which was great because I used 2 frameworks and still found these little gems. Phase 4 is where you refine the theme so that it forms the basis of a coherent story. I mean, it is much easier to tell a story with 4 main points as opposed to the 18 main points that we had in the previous phase. And I literally use these points as headings and subheadings, and while it is not on the screen, sub-subheadings in my eventual write-up. The next phase is where you describe the themes and sub-themes. By this point, you will be so familiar with your data that this will be a piece of cake. But phase 6 is definitely not a piece of cake. This is where you create arguments and draw conclusions, which really tests how well you know your data and how good you are at telling a story and writing in general. Sidebar: I created a series on academic writing because as a supervisor and an external examiner, as in one of the people who decides if someone gets awarded their master's or whatever degree, I receive a lot of dissertations, and some of them are so poorly constructed from a writing perspective that it detracts from the phenomenal work that the researcher has done. So if you are new to this, I just want to emphasize that it is not just about the research, it is also about how you convey your contribution to knowledge. And phase 6 is all about that contribution. You can do phase 1 to 5 so well and just bungle it up when it comes to writing. Please, I am begging you, if you are a work in progress when it comes to storytelling and writing, do everything in your power to become better at it. That was a long sidebar, but yeah. What you are seeing on screen is an extract from one of my studies. Something that I like to do in this phase is inserting the verbatim text that supports my argument so that the reader understands why I came to the conclusions that I did. So everywhere where you see the text on blue highlight, that is where I lifted and shifted text from my analysis into my final report. And that's it for me today. If you have comments or questions, just pop them into the comment section. I do reply to every single one of them. Like this, share this, subscribe to this. This is Dr. J, signing off.